Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Continuing with Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, I'd now like to talk about jinn or ghosts. One of the flats that we lived in, there were some unusual experiences, and it started first with a nephew. He was 16, 17 years old, and he was sleeping in one of the rooms, bedroom of course, and he had an experience. Something tapped him on the shoulder, or he felt something tapped him on the shoulder and said, "I'm your father." He of course said that it wasn't, couldn't be, and then he started to recite the Quran, and whatever it was disappeared. And of course he woke up, whatever it was, felt that there'd been a presence in his room, and actually came and told us about it. We were sleeping in another room, and he woke us up and told us about it, and it obviously had an effect on him. So whatever he had experienced, he thought was close to being real, at least. And as an isolated incident, one wouldn't think much about it. But in practice it turned out not to be an isolated incident. What happened next was that we had a maid, and she was sleeping in that room, and one night we found her sobbing in the doorway of our bedroom, and it took a while to calm her down and ask her what had happened, and it turned out that something had approached her and frightened her. Whether she was in a sleep or half asleep, I don't know. But whatever it was, again, it had been an experience, and it had been something which she felt was coming over her or on her, and she had basically run away in fright and come to us. And it was sufficient for her to be crying. And she must have been 30, 35 years old, so it wasn't as if she was a young, impressionable girl sort of thing. She was a mature woman. So that was a second experience in the same room. And later on, we had a different maid, and we were out shopping, and we came back, and we couldn't find the maid. We were kind of surprised and looking for her, and then we found her hiding in a cupboard in the kitchen, and again she was crying, and we wondered what on earth was going on. And she told us that she saw this huge figure walking in the house, and she literally ran for her life, and the only thing she could find was this big cupboard in the kitchen, so she hid herself in there. And she didn't know anymore whatever had happened or hadn't happened. But it's kind of strange that there were sort of these three incidents in the same house, if there was nothing there, okay? Now, I don't want to get into exorcism or anything like that, and nor do I want to get into supposing more than it really is. Yes, it could have been some sort of figment of the imagination, but three people and three different people, it's a little bit of a coincidence to stretch it that far. But whatever it was, basically everything went back to normal. The maid returned to the room, and she was happy, and nothing else occurred. And my wife sometimes said that she felt there was a presence there. She used to talk to it, she used to recite the Quran, and she didn't feel in any way sort of frightened of it, fortunately. So if there was something there, it seemed as if it was benign, and if there was nothing there, then of course it was just people's overreacting or overactive imaginations. And I don't really want to say any more than that. But of course, as Muslims, we do believe in jinn. Okay, so that's one side of it. So it's all very well to say, well, there's nothing there, but the other side of the coin is that we know that they exist. Okay, and we do know that they can make contact with humans. So in that sense, you know, you can have an open mind if you want it, but you can also come down on one side or the other if you choose. It's entirely up to you. But to say that you don't believe in ghosts would be a bit of a stretch of the imagination now, I think, or you don't believe in jinn would be a stretch of the imagination, I think. And that's really the point of what I'm trying to make here, that we are told these things exist, but we don't normally have any experience of them. But 3 experiences in one house and by 3 different people is a little bit more than a coincidence, and to my mind it tends to support at least the Quranic viewpoint that the jinns do exist. And we know, of course, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ actually led the prayer, and the jinns heard him, and afterwards they actually conveyed the Quran to one another. So, and this was after he came back from Taif, and this was one way of supporting him, that although it had been rejected by people, the jinns had accepted the message. So, you know, there are many ways of looking at things, but there are many ways of supporting some of the things that we take, and sometimes we might be a bit skeptical about. And a lot of people are skeptical of ghosts, okay? So I just tell you this story simply because it was an experience. I actually didn't experience anything myself, I have to be honest there, but I did see the first-hand reaction from people who did experience it, and that was, if you like, sufficient to convince me that at least they exist, okay? So I don't think I want to say any more than that on that particular topic, but it does give a different insight on some aspect of Islam that we don't normally come across, perhaps. So now let me move on to another topic, and here I'd like to focus on something completely different, really. In all the time I've been talking in the UK and giving lectures, only one person has accepted Islam after a lecture that I gave, okay? Other people have embraced Islam and come to me and talked about it and then taken the Shahada, but only one person actually came up to me after a lecture and embraced Islam. And since that was the Quran in daily life, that was the title of the lecture at Newcastle University, let me at least explain what happened, because in a way it's significant perhaps. I was talking about incidents in people's life and how the Quran could actually put their mind at rest or ease the things that they were feeling. And I was going through this, and there was an Englishman towards the front of the audience, and he kept nodding his head, okay, which was a little bit of a surprise because I'm talking about the Quran. Anyway, as the lecture progressed, he was getting more and more sort of agitated, if you like, with the nodding of his head. And then when I finished, and we'd finished the question and answer session, he came up, and his first comment to me was, he said, "You know, we're all Muslims." I said, "Are we?" I said, "What does being a Muslim mean to you then?" He said, "Oh, I believe in one God. I believe in Jesus ﷺ as a prophet and a man, and I believe in Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, as a prophet and a man, and I believe in the message that he came with." I said, "So in that sense you are Muslim?" So, "Well, no," he said. So I said, "So what's the difference? How would you define the difference between people?" He said, "I don't know. How would you do it?" I said, "Well, why aren't the 3 religions the same then, if that's the case? They've all come from the same God, so why aren't the 3 religions the same?" "Oh, okay." I said, "If we look at the authenticity of the religion based on the revelation, only one religion has the revelation in the revealed form as it was revealed to the Prophet of the time, and that's Islam." "Oh, yeah, that's true," he said. I said, "If that's true," I said, "then which religion would be more authentic than the others? In other words, less adulterated by man, if you like." So he said, "Well, I'd have to say Islam, wouldn't I?" I said, "Well then, don't you think that Islam is superior to the other 2 religions in that sense?" "Well, yes." So I said, "Then you're still a Christian?" so he said, "Yeah, but I think I should become Muslim." I said, "No one's forcing you. No one's trying to make the decision for you. You have to come to it on your own. So you think about it and you decide for yourself." "No," he said, "I want to be Muslim." I said, you've already said that you believe in Jesus salam as a man and not as a man-God or a God-man. You already said that you believe in Muhammad sallam, peace and blessing be upon him, as a prophet and a messenger of God. You already said you believe in the message, which is the Quran, as being from God. I said, in this sense, I said, you are a Muslim. It's just that you're not practicing it, or you haven't admitted it to yourself. He said, no, he said, you're right. He said, I'm seeing it clearly now, and I would like to be a Muslim. I said, are you ready to make the commitment? He said, yes. Well, the azan had been called for Maghrib, and the Imam was standing behind us, and he thought we were arguing. He was about to intervene and stop the guy, and I said to him, he's just about to say the Shahada. And I held my hand out, and he took my hand and he said the Shahada, and then we prayed. And then I said to the people around me from the Islamic Society that this man has now become a Muslim. You know, your responsibility. You have to integrate him into the society, into the Muslim community, and that's it. And the guy was very happy. The point being, of course, that he was a Muslim and hadn't realised it. And then they told me afterwards that he'd been reading the Quran for some time. And it was obvious that he knew the Quran, okay? But it was equally obvious that he hadn't come to terms with what Christianity was and what Islam was, or even what Judaism was, and where the distinction lay, and what he should go back to. And of course you go back to the authentic material, and you choose yourself which one you want to believe and which one is the most authentic. And that is actually what he did at the finish, alhamdulillah. So I was pleased and he was pleased, but that's the only time a person has actually embraced Islam after I've spoken in lectures, apart from in Saudi Arabia, where many people did after we talked. But this was in the UK, alhamdulillah. So let me finish this part here, and inshallah we'll come back after a short break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back, and let's continue with Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path. Now, I want us to travel back to Saudi Arabia, and I want to talk another aspect on dawah, really, and this is when the Saudi oil company, the Saudi Aramco oil company, wanted to, every year they sent so many students to the States to study for associate degrees or full degrees, and in 1984 I was asked if I would talk to this batch that was intending to go abroad, mainly to America, but also some to the UK. So I said, well, look, I don't really know the situation in America for Muslims, but I know it in the UK. They said, well, you talk about the UK, it'll be all right, very similar to the States. So I turned up, and it was in a hotel, and there was about 200 students there, and I started to talk, and they listened, of course, and I told them basically about the diet and how to find the food, and the type of interaction they could expect from other students even, and that there were eye socks and things like this in the universities and so on and so forth. And that gave them an insight as to the life they could expect to find in the UK without the pubbing and clubbing and whatever else, socialising, but also that there were these things to watch out for and so on and so forth. And of course alcohol is readily available, and that people might try to take you along and say, oh, it's only a social drink, just have the first one, etc., etc., etc. But I tried to point out the pitfalls of this type of approach, and that they should reject everything like this out of hand. And then there wasn't much else to say really, except from the way of life, and in some cases they'd be staying in houses with people, and then the problems would come in the family life, the social life with the family, because the barriers might not be quite as well drawn as they should be. And so if the family didn't know where the line should be drawn, the Muslims should know where to draw the lines. So I explained all this to them, and that seemed to go down quite well. And the next year I was asked to do the same thing again, but there was about 400 students then, but it was getting bigger, and they had more questions and more direct questions, and some of them were quite searching, but alhamdulillah we got through the session quite well. And then the year I left Dhahran, 1986, there were 800, so it's a huge number really, and there was two of us doing it now, and the other guy was another Englishman, but he'd been in the States, so he's worked there and studied there, and he was a faculty member, so we talked about that. I talked from the UK perspective, he talked from the American perspective, up until Maghrib, and then we broke for the prayer, and I went back, and he didn't come back, he'd disappeared. So I was left to face these 800 students on my own for maybe another hour or more. And then they were asking me more questions about my practice of Islam and how I came to Islam and things like this. And it's quite difficult when a guy says, well, how much of the Quran do you know? And you say, not much. How much? About 20 surahs. Oh, all right. And that kept them quiet. But when I first went, it would have been something like 4 quls, and they used to ask me to lead the prayer. They shouldn't stop, they just kept repeating the same ones. Because I used to be in the mosque for Maghrib. But anyway, I'd learned a little bit more by then, but alhamdulillah. But it's quite funny and quite amusing. And I'm sure if I'd asked them how much they knew, they would have said an awful lot more than what I know. Anyway, alhamdulillah, we do what we can. But it just shows that they were inquisitive and quite direct. They didn't mean to be rude. The Saudis aren't like that in general. They're just inquisitive and quite friendly. They used to come up to me and say to me things like, sir, why is it that registration is so difficult in this university when the previous university where you were, it was so easy? You know, it was just inquisitiveness. It wasn't anything as a real form of criticism. They just couldn't understand why they couldn't both be the same. After all, they were both universities. And you had to explain to them that there were differences and different systems and many more departments in King Saud University than in Daud, which was really just a technical university. So it was actually a joy to work with the students because they were so friendly and so inquisitive. One of them, he arranged for me to talk in a school so that the students could actually improve their English. The idea was that I would talk to them about Islam, which was something that they knew and could understand. And so a lot of the words would be more familiar with them than if I'd just spoken on any other subject. And as a result, of course, you got quite a bit of feedback, and some of them opened up a little, and the teacher was very, very happy because the students did actually make that sort of effort to cross the communication gap, and that's what he wanted, of course. He wanted them to practice speaking English, and we actually could do that, but talking about something that we both had in common, which was Islam. So another form of dawah, if you like, you know. It's amazing the things that crop up, which you don't even look at it coming from that direction, and yet something comes from that direction. And it's just a pleasure to actually do it, because you see the faces and how much they're smiling and how happy they are when they're finding something out, and they're learning something as well, which is good. And I used to feel uncomfortable when if I was talking to one of the students and lunchtime came along, he'd say, come and have lunch with me, and used to go to have lunch with him, and then you find out that he's not quite so well off as some of the students, but he still won't let you pay for your lunch, you know. So you feel quite uncomfortable about that, and a little bit humbled that the guy is doing it, because he won't let you pay, okay, and there's no way you can do that. But it was an eye-opener really to see these sort of things happening, because you don't know when you talk to the person what their background is, okay, and they're all dressed in Daud, so you've got no idea what they're really like. They all look the same, really. And it was a terrible job trying to put names to faces sometimes, because so many Muhammads, so many Abdullahs, and so many of the same name, and they're all dressed exactly the same, and you can't really tell much about them in terms of individual characteristics. But it was fun. It really was fun, and generally speaking, they were a pleasure to be with. One of the things that I used to do when if we made a breakthrough in terms of installing software or hardware on the computer system, I used to try to get everyone together and either take them to an Arab restaurant where we'd have shish kebab or something, or in one case the operations team, they decided that they would provide the food and would go down to the beach. So we did this, and I got another culture shock here, because they took the lid off the big pans that they'd brought, and they had kapsa. And they took out my sheep's head, and one guy just put his hand in the two halves of the mouth and just pulled the head open like this, and then took out the tongue and the brain. He said, "Do you want this?" And I said, "No, thanks." It was the last thing I was expecting. And I hadn't seen the head opened like that before, so I was kind of surprised. But I mean, that was a culture shock, if you like. But you know, these things happen, and you make the best of it. And of course, it's that they mean well, and you have to accept that, I think. And there's no form of criticism on my part. I looked at it and I took part in it, and either I liked it or I didn't. But you know, that's all there was to it. There was nothing else involved. And we were laughing and joking about it after a little while, you know, because it's something I hadn't come across before. And the operations supervisor was a person that I was quite friendly with, and we had some sort of respect for each other, so that was quite good. And he had meant well by doing it, there's no doubt about that. And I learnt something as well, alhamdulillah. So, I mean, there was always some sort of difference that you weren't sure of. I mean, one night, two of the operators left the computer centre, and they'd had an argument, and one pulled his car across the other one and stopped, and they had a fight, and one was injured a little bit, and they went home, and I said to the supervisor, I want them both in my office. And they both came in my office, and I said, you shake hands and make up, or you leave. I said, you did this on university property, and we're responsible for you. You've been off university property, I can't say anything to you. But as long as you're on university property, we're responsible for you. So, and I'm not having it. So you decide what you want to do. In actual fact, they actually shook hands and made up, and that was a surprise because I didn't know that they could do that easily. So again, that was another culture shock, you know, because how do you deal with these people? You know? And one guy one night, I said to him that you're supposed to be working in the student terminal area, aren't you? And he said yes. And he said, I'm not going to. Well, I mean, you can't have someone tell you that he's not going to do his work and still expect him to work for you. So I went to the director and I said to him, what will you do about it? Will you tell him he has to leave, go home? He said, Daud, what if he doesn't go? What if he doesn't do what I tell him? I said, well, that's basically your problem. But the way things are at the moment, you're the only one that can solve my problem. You've got to actually stand in for me and tell him and see what he does. So he told the guy, and the guy went back and went home, actually. And in the morning he came into work, and I said to him, but you haven't got a job here now. He said, you can't fire me. I said, no one's firing you. I said, you go to personnel and you talk to them. I've already spoken to them. They'll try and find you a job in another department. But I want to stay here. I said, you can't. I said, you're not prepared to do the work. We can't take you back now, not after what you did. Oh, he said. So he learnt. But he went to personnel, and to his credit, he went into security. And when I left the university in 1986, he was in fact the head of security. So he'd done well for himself. And he actually thanked me for it. So they had potential, even though they don't know how to handle themselves. But somehow or other they find a way, alhamdulillah. And then you look back and you think, well, that really was a success story. Okay, or maybe I handled it in a rough manner. Maybe it wasn't the courteous way that the Arabs would have liked. But at least I handled it, and at least he got something out of it and got promotion as well, alhamdulillah. So let me end this episode here. And until we meet again, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.